Welcome to Javel Stories. Before we continue with this story, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell to always get notified for upcoming stories, and also share this story with loved ones and friends. Thank you very much. Richard's life seemed perfect. As a wealthy businessman, he had a loving wife, Amelia, and a baby daughter, Grace, who was the light of his life. He spent quality time with his family, cherishing every laugh and moment of joy. His wealth afforded them a beautiful home and every comfort imaginable. Yet it was his emotional investment in their happiness that made their bond unshakable. Amelia often admired how devoted Richard was to them, believing nothing could ever tear them apart. But lurking in their lives was Richard's childhood friend, Daniel. Unlike Richard, Daniel lived recklessly, indulging in gambling and flings with women. Though Richard valued their long-standing friendship, Amelia had reservations about Daniel's influence. She often told Richard that Daniel was a bad role model and could lead him astray. But Richard, trusting his friend, dismissed her concerns, unaware of the seeds of trouble Daniel was about to plant in their paradise. Daniel, charismatic but morally questionable, visited Richard's home frequently. His stories of wild adventures and carefree living fascinated Richard, who began to feel as though his life was too predictable. Daniel often teased him about being tied down by family life, suggesting that Richard deserved to have a little excitement of his own. Amelia observed these conversations uneasily, sensing that Daniel's influence was beginning to cloud Richard's judgment and weaken his steadfast devotion to their family. One day, Daniel brought a new acquaintance, Sylvia, to meet Richard. Sylvia was strikingly beautiful, with a charm that masked her manipulative nature. She quickly captured Richard's attention, complimenting him in ways that made him feel appreciated in a way he hadn't in years. Amelia saw through Sylvia's facade immediately and warned Richard to keep his distance. However, Richard, tempted by the allure of something new, ignored her, setting in motion a chain of events that would shatter their lives. Richard began spending more time with Daniel and Sylvia, often staying out late and neglecting family dinners. Amelia, heartbroken, noticed the changes in him, the way he avoided her gaze, and how distracted he became around Grace. She confronted him about his behavior, but Richard brushed her concerns aside, claiming she was overreacting. Deep down, however, he was already grappling with guilt, but found himself unable to resist Sylvia's intoxicating charm. As the weeks turned into months, Richard's emotional distance turned into outright absence. His late-night escapades with Sylvia became more frequent, and Daniel fueled his detachment with constant reminders that life was too short to be tied down. Amelia's warnings grew louder, but her words fell on deaf ears. Richard, once the pillar of their family, was crumbling under the weight of temptation and Daniel's manipulations, leaving Amelia and Grace to face an uncertain future. The breaking point came on a cold evening when Richard returned home and announced that he wanted Amelia and Grace to leave. Sylvia had convinced him that his family was holding him back from true happiness and success. Amelia, devastated and desperate, begged him to reconsider, reminding him of the life they had built together. But Richard's heart had hardened, and he refused to listen, prioritizing his newfound relationship over the wife and daughter who loved him unconditionally. Amelia packed their belongings with tears streaming down her face, trying to stay strong for Grace. The once warm home they had built now felt cold and unwelcoming. She left with Grace in her arms, determined to start over despite the immense challenges ahead. Richard, blinded by his infatuation with Sylvia, didn't realize the depth of his mistake, nor did he see the sorrow in Grace's eyes as they disappeared from his life. With Amelia and Grace gone, Richard fully embraced his life with Sylvia. He allowed her increasing control over his decisions, from his personal life to his businesses. Under Daniel's persuasion, he transferred ownership of several assets to Sylvia, believing her promises of partnership and loyalty. Richard, once a shrewd businessman, was now entirely consumed by his emotions, unaware of the trap being set by the two people he trusted most. Meanwhile, Amelia began rebuilding her life from scratch. She found a modest apartment and took on multiple jobs to provide for Grace. Despite the hardships, her love for her daughter fueled her determination. Each day was a struggle, but Amelia remained hopeful that she could give Grace the life she deserved. However, her physical health began to falter, though she kept it a secret, unwilling to burden anyone with her pain. Amelia's days were long and grueling. She worked as a cleaner in the mornings and as a waitress at night, barely earning enough to cover rent and food. Her body ached from exhaustion, but she pushed through for Grace's sake. Despite her struggles, she ensured Grace felt loved and protected, filling their small home with laughter and warmth. She often told Grace bedtime stories about brighter days to come, even as she silently battled her worsening health. Her condition, diagnosed as amyloidosis, was incurable and slowly debilitating. Amelia's doctor warned her that the disease was advancing, but she refused to let it defeat her spirit. Instead, she poured all her energy into raising Grace. She avoided medical treatments due to their high cost, prioritizing Grace's needs over her own. While she carried the burden of her illness alone, Amelia's unwavering love for Grace became her driving force to keep going. Grace grew up in poverty, but Amelia worked tirelessly to shield her from the harsh realities of their life. Every morning, Amelia would braid Grace's hair and walk her to the local school, ensuring she always had something to eat, no matter how little they could afford. Grace adored her mother, who filled her small world with love and encouragement. To Grace, Amelia was a superhero, strong, kind, and unbreakable, even as her body grew weaker. However, Amelia's condition was taking its toll. She would collapse from exhaustion after a day's work, clutching her chest in pain. Yet, she refused to let Grace see her struggles. Instead, she celebrated every milestone in Grace's life, no matter how small. Unbeknownst to Grace, her mother was racing against time, pushing herself to ensure her daughter had the tools to survive in a world that had not been kind to them. Amelia's worsening health became impossible to ignore. Her once vibrant energy dwindled as the disease advanced, and even simple tasks became challenging. Yet, she remained fiercely independent, refusing to let anyone pity her. She hid her medical reports from Grace, unwilling to let her daughter's innocence be shadowed by the weight of her illness. Amelia told herself she would hold on long enough to see Grace finish school and stand on her own. One day, Amelia fainted at work and was rushed to the hospital. The doctors urged her to seek long-term treatment, but the costs were far beyond her reach. She returned home, determined to fight her battles alone. Every night, after Grace went to bed, Amelia would write letters to her daughter, words of love, advice, and encouragement for the future. These letters, she hoped, would guide Grace in the years to come if she couldn't be there herself. Meanwhile, Richard's life with Sylvia took a dark turn. Once she had gained control of his businesses, she, along with Daniel, began siphoning money and transferring assets into her name. Richard, blinded by love and guilt, failed to notice the betrayal until it was too late. His businesses collapsed, and his wealth evaporated overnight. Sylvia and Daniel disappeared, leaving Richard destitute and utterly alone. Left with nothing but regret, Richard sold his mansion and moved into a small, rundown apartment. His once proud stature was now hunched with shame. Memories of Amelia and Grace haunted him, and he began to realize the magnitude of his mistakes. He longed to see them again, but his pride and guilt held him back. In his darkest moments, Richard prayed for redemption, though he doubted he deserved it. Amelia's condition deteriorated rapidly. She collapsed while preparing dinner one evening and Grace, now a teenager, frantically called for help. At the hospital, Amelia held Grace's hand, whispering words of love and pride. She told Grace to be strong and never lose faith, no matter how hard life became. Her final words were, "You are my greatest gift, Grace. Never forget that." Amelia passed away, leaving Grace to face the world alone. Grace was devastated. Her mother had been her anchor, her strength, and her guide. The loss left her adrift, but Grace knew she had to honor Amelia's sacrifices by continuing to fight for her dreams. She promised herself that she would make her mother proud, no matter the odds. Clutching one of her mother's letters, Grace vowed to survive and thrive, even as the weight of grief threatened to crush her. After Amelia's death, Grace faced unimaginable struggles. She worked multiple jobs to pay for school, often going hungry so she could afford books and supplies. At night, she would study under the dim light of a shared shelter, driven by the memory of her mother's sacrifices. Despite the challenges, Grace excelled in her studies, earning scholarships that kept her dreams alive. Her resilience was fueled by the letters her mother had left behind. Each letter contained words of wisdom, encouragement, and love, reminding Grace that she was never truly alone. Slowly but surely, Grace began to carve a path for herself, proving that no obstacle was insurmountable. Her journey was grueling, but every step forward was a tribute to the woman who had given her everything. After losing everything, Richard found work as a gardener on a wealthy estate. The once proud businessman now toiled in the soil, pruning hedges and planting flowers. The physical labor was humbling, but Richard embraced it as penance for his past mistakes. He found solace in the simplicity of the work, though memories of his family often left him in tears. Unbeknownst to him, the estate belonged to Grace, now a successful businesswoman. She had risen from the ashes of her childhood struggles to build a thriving tech company. Grace hired Richard without knowing his true identity, impressed by his diligence and humility. To Richard, the job was a lifeline, though he never imagined the truth that would soon come to light. Grace's hard work paid off, and her company became a beacon of innovation and success. She created jobs for others, often prioritizing those who had faced adversity. Her philanthropic efforts were inspired by her mother's selflessness, and she dedicated a wing of her company to programs for single mothers and struggling students. Despite her success, Grace remained humble and compassionate. She often walked through her estate, speaking kindly to her staff and ensuring they were treated well. It was during one of these walks that she noticed Richard's work ethic and sincerity. Though she didn't recognize him, something about him felt familiar, sparking a curiosity she couldn't shake. Richard quickly became one of the most respected workers on the estate. He took pride in every task, treating the gardens as if they were his own. His quiet demeanor and unwavering dedication caught Grace's attention, and she began to strike up conversations with him. Richard, unaware Grace was his daughter, found her kindness and warmth eerily reminiscent of Amelia. He admired her strength and compassion, though he kept his past a secret. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope, even as his health began to deteriorate. One day, Richard collapsed while working in the garden. Grace, horrified, rushed him to the hospital and insisted on covering his medical expenses. The doctors ran tests and discovered that Richard's condition was dire. He had idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a terminal lung disease. Richard, resigned to his fate, thanked Grace for her kindness. He didn't expect her to do more than provide basic care, but Grace, moved by his humility and vulnerability, decided to stay by his side. She felt an unexplainable bond with him, one that grew stronger with each passing day. Richard's condition required a blood transfusion, and Grace volunteered to donate. During routine compatibility testing, the doctors discovered a genetic match that was too close to be coincidental. Grace was stunned when the doctor explained the possibility of a familial relationship between her and Richard. Confronting him, Grace demanded answers. Richard, overwhelmed with guilt, tearfully confessed his identity and recounted the mistakes that had led to their separation. He begged for forgiveness, though he believed he didn't deserve it. Grace was left reeling, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, sorrow, and confusion. Grace struggled to reconcile her feelings. Memories of her mother's sacrifices and her own hardships filled her with resentment, but she also saw the broken man before her, a man who had suffered greatly for his choices. Her mother's letters urged forgiveness, but the wounds of abandonment were deep. Richard, knowing his time was short, spent his days sharing stories about Amelia and their early family life. He hoped to give Grace a sense of the love they once shared, even if he couldn't undo the past. Grace, despite her anger, found herself drawn to these stories, slowly piecing together the man her father once was. As Richard's health declined, he wrote Grace a letter, pouring out his regrets, love, and gratitude. In it, he apologized for the pain he caused and expressed his hope that she would find peace. His greatest wish was for Grace to live a life filled with love and purpose, just as Amelia had envisioned. On his final day, Richard held Grace's hand and whispered his last words, "You are my greatest gift." He passed away peacefully, leaving Grace with tears streaming down her face. Though his death was heartbreaking, Grace found solace in knowing he had sought redemption in his final moments. Grace read Richard's letter and felt a profound sense of closure. She realized that forgiveness didn't erase the pain, but allowed her to move forward. In honor of her parents, Grace created the Amelia and Richard Foundation, supporting single mothers, struggling students, and those in need. Through her work, Grace found healing, turning her pain into purpose. Her parents' love, though imperfect, became a guiding light in her life. In the end, she chose to remember the good and carry their legacy forward, ensuring their sacrifices were never forgotten. After Richard's passing, Grace struggled with a mix of emotions, grief, forgiveness, and a sense of closure. Reading his final letter helped her understand the depth of his regret and love, but it didn't erase the years of pain she and her mother endured. She decided to honor both her parents' legacies by creating a life that reflected their sacrifices. Grace threw herself into her philanthropic work, finding comfort in helping others rise above hardships. Grace began to forgive not only her father, but also herself for the resentment she had held for years. She reflected on Amelia's unwavering love and Richard's sincere attempt at redemption. While their time together was tragically short, it gave Grace a sense of closure that she hadn't known she needed. With renewed determination, she vowed to make their sacrifices meaningful by continuing to thrive and help others in similar situations. Grace established the Amelia and Richard Foundation, a nonprofit organization aimed at supporting single mothers, children from disadvantaged backgrounds, and those battling chronic illnesses. She invested her resources into programs that provided education, housing, and health care for those in need. The foundation quickly gained traction, and Grace found fulfillment in seeing lives transformed through her efforts. The foundation became a way for Grace to channel her pain into purpose. Every program and initiative reminded her of her parents' struggles and sacrifices. She made it a point to personally meet with the beneficiaries, sharing their stories and finding inspiration in their resilience. Grace felt that in helping others, she was keeping her parents' memory alive, especially the love and strength her mother had instilled in her. Grace's foundation expanded its reach, helping thousands across the country. She partnered with schools, hospitals, and local governments to provide resources for vulnerable families. The foundation's signature program, Amelia's Promise, offered scholarships to children of single mothers, ensuring that they had the opportunities Grace once fought so hard for. Through her work, Grace found a sense of peace. The foundation became a symbol of hope, and Grace often credited her mother's letters and her father's redemption for inspiring her mission. The impact of her parents' lives, both their triumphs and mistakes, became a guiding force in everything she did. One day, while sorting through old belongings, Grace found another one of her mother's letters tucked into an old book. In it, Amelia wrote about the importance of forgiveness, reminding Grace that everyone makes mistakes and that redemption, no matter how late, is still valuable. Reading those words brought tears to Grace's eyes, reinforcing her decision to forgive Richard before his death. She also found a photograph of her parents from before her birth. They looked so happy, so full of hope. Grace realized that despite the pain and betrayal, there had been genuine love between them once. It was that love that had created her, and for that, she was grateful. It gave her the strength to continue building the life her parents had wanted for her. Grace began sharing her personal story at events and conferences. She spoke openly about her mother's sacrifices, her father's mistakes, and their ultimate redemption. Her honesty resonated with others, inspiring people to believe in second chances and the power of forgiveness. Many saw her as a beacon of hope and resilience, someone who turned pain into purpose. Grace's speeches often included anecdotes about her mother's strength and the lessons she learned from her father in his final days. Through these stories, she reminded people that no matter how broken a family might seem, love and forgiveness could bring healing. Her journey became a source of inspiration for many who faced similar struggles. As Grace's foundation grew, she expanded its mission to include free health clinics for low-income families. These clinics were named after her father, Richard, as a way to honor his redemption and the lessons he taught her about humility and change. Every time she visited one of these clinics, she felt a sense of pride in how far she had come. Grace also began mentoring young women, encouraging them to persevere through challenges and embrace opportunities. She shared her mother's wisdom and her father's story, hoping to instill resilience in others. Each person she helped felt like a step toward healing her own heart, a way of making peace with the past while shaping a brighter future. One evening, while attending an event for her foundation, Grace met a young girl who reminded her of herself as a child. The girl, barely 10 years old, spoke about her mother's struggles and how Grace's foundation had helped them. The child's gratitude brought Grace to tears, and she felt her mother's spirit in that moment, as if Amelia was watching over her. The encounter reaffirmed Grace's belief that her parents' sacrifices and redemption had not been in vain. The young girl's story was a living testament to the impact her foundation was making. Grace resolved to keep expanding her efforts, knowing that every person she helped was a tribute to her parents' memory. Though Grace had forgiven her father, she realized she still carried emotional scars. She sought therapy to confront the lingering pain of abandonment and grief. With time, she learned to fully let go of the anger and embrace the love she had rediscovered in her father's final days. Through this journey, Grace felt closer to both her parents. She often visited her mother's grave, sharing updates about her life and the foundation. On one visit, she brought flowers to her father's grave as well, thanking him for teaching her the value of humility and second chances. To commemorate her parents' love and sacrifices, Grace established a scholarship in their names. The Amelia and Richard Memorial Scholarship supported students from low-income families who showed exceptional determination to succeed despite adversity. Grace personally reviewed applications, often moved by the stories she read. The scholarship became one of her foundation's most celebrated programs, helping hundreds of students achieve their dreams. Grace felt that by giving these young people a chance, she was continuing her parents' legacy of love and resilience. The program brought her immense joy, knowing her parents would have been proud of her efforts. Grace, now in her late 30s, reflected on her journey. She had faced unimaginable hardships, but had emerged stronger, shaped by the lessons of her past. She often thought about her mother's love and her father's redemption, realizing that both had given her the strength to overcome life's challenges. She had built a life filled with purpose and compassion, ensuring her parents' sacrifices were never forgotten. Grace felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before, grateful for the opportunities to heal and grow. Her parents' story became a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and second chances. As Grace stood in the garden of her estate, now lush and thriving, she thought of her father tending to the flowers years ago. The garden had become a place of reflection for her, a symbol of how life, like the flowers, could bloom again after even the harshest storms. Surrounded by her foundation's success and the lives it had touched, Grace felt her parents' presence. She knew they would always be with her, guiding her. With a smile, she whispered, "Thank you, Mom and Dad. I hope I've made you proud." And with that, Grace walked forward, ready to continue her journey of healing, giving, and love.